The rain hit Marcus Whitmore's face like 1,000 tiny accusations, each drop reminding him that $32 billion couldn't buy him shelter from a storm, or from the wreckage of his own life. He stood there, soaked to the bone, staring at the flickering lights of the bus stop ahead like it was some kind of mirage. His driver was gone. His phone was dead. His perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, the one that cost more than most people made in 6 months, clung to his body like wet newspaper. And somewhere in the chaos of the last hour, between the screaming match with his father and the moment he'd stumbled out of the board meeting that would determine his entire future, Marcus Whitmore had become just another person caught in the rain. The irony wasn't lost on him. Thunder cracked overhead, violent and unforgiving, and Marcus quickened his pace toward the bus stop. He'd never taken public transportation in his life. Never had to. But tonight, with his world imploding and his carefully constructed empire teetering on the edge of collapse, he found himself stumbling toward a weathered bench under a plastic shelter, desperate for anything that resembled sanctuary. That's when he saw her. She sat at the edge of the bench, her body curved protectively around a stack of papers she was trying to shield from the rain that blew in sideways to the open sides of the shelter. Her dark hair was plastered to her cheeks, and her simple blue cardigan, worn thin at the elbows, was darkened with moisture. She didn't look up as he approached, too focused on her papers, on whatever was written there that seemed more important than the storm raging around them. Marcus hesitated at the entrance to the shelter, water streaming from his clothes, creating puddles at his feet. He felt strangely exposed, like he'd wandered onto a stage without knowing his lines. "You can come in," she said without looking up, her voice cutting to the sound of rain hammering against plastic. "There's room." He moved inside, and immediately felt the slight relief of being out of the direct downpour, though the wind still carried spray through the open sides. Up close, he could see her more clearly. The determinedness of her jaw, the way her fingers gripped those papers like they were precious cargo, the small silver necklace at her throat that caught the dim light from the single bulb overhead. "Brutal night," Marcus said, because he felt like he should say something, like silence would somehow reveal too much about who he was, or where he'd come from, or what he was running from. "Every Tuesday in October, apparently," she replied, still not looking at him. Her pen moved across the paper in quick, decisive strokes. "You'd think I'd learn to check the forecast by now." Marcus found himself staring at her hands. Small, elegant, marked with what looked like ink stains and chalk dust. Teacher, his mind supplied automatically. The papers, the corrections in red pen, the way she held herself with that particular blend of exhaustion and determination he'd seen in his own teachers, back before private tutors and exclusive academies had isolated him from the real world. "What are you grading?" he heard himself ask, and was surprised by the genuine curiosity in his voice. This time, she did look up, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest when their eyes met. Hers were brown, deep and warm and infinitely tired, but there was something else there too, a spark of life, of passion, of something that money had never been able to buy him. "Essays," she said, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "My 10th graders were supposed to write about what courage means to them. Most of them wrote about superheroes and video game characters, but a few—" She trailed off, looking back down at the paper in her hands. "A few of them really got it." Marcus sat down on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance, though the small space meant they were closer than he'd normally allow himself to be with a stranger. He could smell her perfume, something light and floral, probably inexpensive, but it cut to the scent of rain and wet concrete in a way that made him want to lean closer. "What did they say?" he asked. "About courage." She glanced at him again, this time with more scrutiny, her eyes traveling from his ruined designer shoes to his soaked shirt, now nearly transparent against the skin. He saw the moment she registered the quality of his clothes, the expensive watch on his wrist, waterproof. Thank God, the hint of privilege that probably clung to him like cologne. But if she was impressed or intimidated, she didn't show it. "One of my students wrote that courage isn't about not being afraid," she said slowly, testing him with her words. "It's about being terrified and doing the thing anyway. It's about standing up when everything in you wants to run away." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he had to look away, out into the storm, because suddenly he couldn't breathe quite right. Wasn't that exactly what he'd just done? Run away? Walked out of that meeting when his father had demanded he sign the merger papers. When the board had looked at it with those expectant faces, waiting for him to be the man they needed him to be? Smart kid, he managed, his voice rougher than intended. She is, the woman agreed, too smart for her own good sometimes. Asks questions that don't have easy answers. Those are usually the only questions worth asking. She studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable sensation of being seen, really seen, in a way he hadn't been in years. In his world, people looked at him and saw dollar signs, saw connections, saw opportunities. They saw the Whitmore name and the fortune attached to it. They saw power and influence and all the things that money could buy. She just saw a man soaked from rain, looking lost. "I'm Olivia," she said finally, extending her hand across the space between them. "Olivia Chen." He took her hand, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt of electricity up his arm. Or maybe that was just the storm, the lightning that chose that exact moment to illuminate the sky. Her hand was small in his, warm despite the cold, and he held a fraction too long before releasing it. "Marcus," he said, and left it at that, savoring the strange freedom of being just a name, not a brand, not a headline, not a net worth. "Well, Marcus," Olivia said, settling back against the bench and returning to her papers. "Welcome to public transportation hell. The next bus isn't due for another 20 minutes, and considering how tonight's going, it'll probably be late. 20 minutes. Marcus tried to remember the last time he'd had 20 unscheduled minutes, time that wasn't accounted for in his calendar, blocked out for meetings or negotiations, or the endless performance of being Marcus Whitmore, heir to the Whitmore empire. He couldn't. "I'm not in a hurry," he said, and realized it was true. Thunder rumbled overhead, closer this time, and the rain intensified, drumming against the shelter's roof like it was trying to drown out every other sound in the world. Olivia made a small noise of frustration as a gust of wind sent spray across her papers, smudging the ink. Without thinking, Marcus shrugged out his suit jacket, already soaked, but perhaps still useful, and held it up as a makeshift barrier between her papers and the wind. "Here," he said, "use this." She looked at him in surprise, then at the jacket. Armani, custom-tailored, worth more than she probably made in a month, and shook her head. "I can't. That's ruin anyway," he interrupted. "The rain got it. Might as well serve some purpose." For a moment, he thought she'd refuse on principle, pride keeping her from accepting help from a stranger, especially one who clearly had money. But then she smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face, and nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. Together, they arranged a jacket to block the worst of the wind, and Olivia bent back over her work, her pen flying across the pages with renewed focus. Marcus found himself watching her, fascinated by the intensity of her concentration. The way she occasionally murmured to herself as she read, the small furrow that appeared between her eyebrows when she encountered something that troubled her. "You really care about this," he observed. "About what?" "Their words, their essays, what they think." Olivia paused, her pen hovering over the paper. When she looked at him, there was something fierce in her eyes, something that made his heart beat faster. "They're 15 years old," she said. "Most of them come from neighborhoods where nobody expects them to be anything. Some of them have parents working 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Others don't have parents at all. When they write, when they open up and share what's in their hearts." She broke off, shaking her head. "That's sacred. That's trust. If I don't care about that, if I don't honor what they give me, then what's the point of any of this?" Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. Something he kept sealed away for so long he'd almost forgotten it was there. Passion, purpose, the sense that what you did mattered, that it meant something beyond profit margins and shareholder value. "You love them," he said. "I do," Olivia replied simply. "Even when they drive me crazy. Even when they forget to do their homework, or talk back, or test every boundary I set. Especially then, actually, because that's when they need someone to love them most." Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of illumination, Marcus saw her clearly. Not just her face, but everything she represented. She was real in a way nothing in his life had been real for years. She cared about things that couldn't be bought or sold or leveraged. She poured herself into work that would never make her rich, never get her name in papers, never earn her a seat on a corporate board. And she was beautiful. Not in the polished, calculated way of the women who orbited his world. The models and actresses and socialites who knew exactly how to angle their faces to the cameras, who moved through life like they were always on display. Olivia's beauty was unstudied, natural, born from the person she was rather than the image she projected. "What about you?" she asked, pulling him from his thoughts. "What do you do, Marcus?" The question, simple, innocent, the kind of thing strangers asked each other every day, landed like a grenade in his lap. What did he do? He ran a company. He managed investments. He sat in meetings and made decisions that affected thousands of people, moved millions of dollars with his signature, shaped markets with his words. But what did he do? "I work in business," he said finally, the words feeling hollow even as he spoke them. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "That's delightfully vague." "Corporate management," he clarified, still dancing around the truth. "Mergers and acquisitions, mostly." "Sound important." "It's supposed to be." She caught the bitterness in his voice, her eyes sharpening with interest. "But you don't think it is?" Marcus opened his mouth to deflect, to give her some polished corporate answer about shareholder value and market efficiency, and all the other terms that had been drilled into him since birth. But something about the rain, about the darkness, about this woman who looked at him like he was just a person, it made him want to tell the truth. "I think I used to know why it mattered," he said slowly. "When I was younger, I thought." He stopped, running a hand through his wet hair. "My family's company. We started out building things. Real things. Housing developments for working families. Community centers. Infrastructure projects that change people's lives. My grandfather, he believed that success meant lifting everyone up with you. And now," Olivia asked gently, "now we buy and sell companies like they're chess pieces. We optimize and restructure and maximize shareholder returns. We make rich people richer." And his voice caught. "I can't remember the last time I built something that mattered." The silence that followed felt heavy, weighted with all the things Marcus had never said aloud, all the doubts he'd buried under duty and expectation, and the constant pressure to be what his father needed him to be. "Is that why you're standing in a bus stop in a storm?" Olivia asked, instead of in some warm office making rich people richer. Marcus let out a short laugh, surprised by her directness. "Something like that. Want to talk about it?" "Not really." "Fair enough." She returned to her papers, giving him space, respecting his boundaries in a way that made him want to tear them all down and tell her everything. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the storm continuing its assault on the world outside their small shelter. Marcus found himself oddly at peace, despite everything, despite his father's fury, despite the ultimatum hanging over his head, despite the fact that in 12 hours he'd have to decide whether to sign papers that would fundamentally change who his company was and what it stood for. "This student of yours," he said eventually, "the one who wrote about courage. Did she say why she chose that topic?" Olivia glanced up, a sad smile crossing her face. "She's in foster care. 4th placement in 3 years. She wrote about how every time she has to pack her bag and move to a new home, she wants to disappear, wants to just stop trying. But she doesn't. She keeps showing up, keeps trying, keeps believing that maybe this time it'll be different." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "That's heartbreaking." Olivia supplied. "Yeah, but also incredible. She's 15 years old, and she's lived through things that would destroy most adults, and she still comes to class every day with her homework done and her head held high. That's courage." "What's her name?" "Why?" Olivia asked, suddenly cautious. "No reason. Marcus shook his head. "I'd like to know her name. To remember that courage looks like that." Olivia studied him for a long moment, then seemed to come to some internal decision. "Maya. Her name is Maya Rodriguez." "Maya," Marcus repeated, committing it to memory along with everything else about this strange night. The rain, the thunder, the woman with ink-stained fingers and a heart big enough to hold all her students' pain. A bus appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the rain like searchlights. Marcus felt a strange sense of loss as it approached, knowing that this moment, this odd, perfect moment of anonymity and honesty, was about to end. Olivia began gathering her papers, carefully folding his jacket and handing it back to him. "Thank you," she said, "for the windbreak and for the conversation." "Thank you," Marcus replied, meaning it more than she could know. The bus pulled up with a hiss of air brakes, and the doors opened. Olivia stood, slinging her worn bag over her shoulder, her papers clutched protectively to her chest. She moved toward the bus, then paused, turning back to look at him. "Are you coming?" Marcus glanced at the bus, then at her, then at the storm still raging beyond their shelter. He thought about his car, probably still parked somewhere near the office. Thought about the penthouse apartment waiting for him across the city, empty and cold and perfect. Thought about the decision he'd have to make tomorrow, about signing those papers or walking away from everything he'd ever known. "No," he said. "Not yet." Olivia nodded, understanding something in his answer that he hadn't quite articulated. "Well, Marcus from corporate management," she said. "I hope you find what you're looking for." She climbed aboard the bus, and through the rain-streaked windows, Marcus watched her make her way to a seat near the middle. She didn't look back. The bus pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the storm, and Marcus was alone again. Except he didn't feel alone. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in years, his heart pounding not from stress or pressure or the constant wave of expectation, but from something simpler and more profound. Connection, recognition, the sense that for 20 minutes in a bus stop, someone had seen him, really seen him, and hadn't turned away. Marcus pulled out his phone, now slightly less dead thanks to his briefcase's emergency charger he discovered in his jacket pocket. It flickered to life, immediately flooding with notifications. Texts from his assistant, emails from board members, 3 missed calls from his father, each one probably angrier than the last. He ignored them all and opened a browser, typing with cold fingers. Maya Rodriguez foster care Los Angeles Courage. Nothing came up, of course. One student among millions, one girl's story buried among countless others. But Marcus had resources, had connections, had money that, for the first time in his life, he wanted to use for something that mattered. He made a call, not caring about the late hour or the rain still hammering down around him. "Jenkins," he said when his head of security answered. "I need you to find someone. Quietly. No press, no publicity. I need to know everything about the foster care system in the Los Angeles School District. Specifically," he paused, Olivia's words echoing in his mind. "That's sacred. That's trust. Actually," he amended, "scratch that. I need you to find me the name of every school in the district that serves at-risk youth. And I need a list of what those schools need. Funding, supplies, whatever would make the biggest difference. Can you have that by morning?" Jenkins, to his credit, didn't question the request. "Yes, sir. Anything else?" Marcus thought about Olivia, about her worn cardigan, and her passionate defense of her students, about the way she looked at him like he was capable of being more than his bank account. "Yeah," he said. "Find out everything you can about establishing a foundation. Something focused on education, on helping kids like..." He stopped himself from saying Maya's name, honoring Olivia's trust even in her absence. Kids in the foster system. Kids who need someone to believe in them. "A foundation, sir?" "That's what I said. May I ask what brought this on?" Marcus looked out at the storm, at the empty street where the bus had disappeared, and felt a smile tug at his lips despite everything. "Let's just say I met someone who reminded me what courage looks like." He ended the call and stood there in the shelter for another few minutes, letting the rain and the thunder wash over him, feeling like something essential had shifted in his understanding of the world and his place in it. Finally, he flagged down a passing taxi, because even billionaires sometimes needed a reminder that they were just human, and gave the driver an address. Not his penthouse, not his father's estate, but a different place, one he hadn't visited in years. The headquarters of Whitmore Development's original office, the one his grandfather had built with his own hands, before the company had grown into an empire, before money had become the only thing that mattered. It was time to remember what they'd been before they'd become what they were. It was time to decide what kind of man Marcus Whitmore wanted to be. Marcus hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night in his grandfather's old office, now converted to a storage space filled with filing cabinets and boxes of archived documents that nobody looked at anymore, reading through reports and contracts and letters that told the story of what Whitmore Development had been at its inception. Every page was a revelation. Every document a reminder of the man his grandfather had been and the legacy Marcus had inherited but never fully understood. There were letters from families thanking his grandfather for building affordable housing when no one else would. Photos of ribbon-cutting ceremonies at community centers in neighborhoods that had been neglected by everyone else. Articles praising his grandfather's vision, his commitment to proving that business could be both profitable and purposeful, that success didn't have to come at the expense of someone else's failure. By the time dawn broke through the windows, painting the dusty office in shades of gold, Marcus had made his decision. He walked into the board meeting at precisely 9 a.m., still wearing yesterday's clothes, now dry but hopelessly wrinkled, with his hair uncombed and his jaw shadowed with stubble. The room fell silent as he entered, 12 sets of eyes fixing on him with varying degrees of concern, curiosity, and calculation. His father sat at the head of the table, his face carved from stone, his eyes cold with fury. "You're late," Richard Whitmore said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm exactly on time," Marcus replied, taking his seat at the opposite end of the table. The seat his grandfather used to occupy, before age and illness had forced him to step back. "Shall we begin? Where the hell were you last night?" Richard demanded, ignoring the agenda, ignoring protocol, his anger finally breaking through his carefully maintained control. "You walked out of the most important meeting of your career. You disappeared for hours. I had every security team in the city looking for you. I needed to think." "You needed to." Richard's face flushed red. "We have investors waiting. We have deadlines. We have a merger that hinges on your signature, and you needed to think." Marcus met his father's gaze steadily, not flinching, not backing down. "Yes, I needed to think about what grandfather would have wanted, what he built this company to be." "Your grandfather is dead," Richard said flatly. "What he wanted doesn't matter anymore. What matters is keeping this company competitive, keeping our shareholders happy, keeping our position in the market. And if that means abandoning everything he believed in, everything that made this company worth building in the first place, it means adapting, evolving, growing up, Marcus, and accepting that the world doesn't run on idealism and good intentions." The board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. This wasn't supposed to be a family therapy session. This was supposed to be a simple signing, a formality. Papers passed across the table, and a merger sealed with champagne and handshakes. Marcus pulled a folder from his briefcase, one he'd assembled through night, filled with copies of his grandfather's original business plan, his mission statement, his vision for what Whitmore Development could be. "I've made my decision," he said quietly. "I won't sign the merger." The room erupted. Board members spoke over each other, voices raised in protest and panic and disbelief. His father's fist came down on the table hard enough to make the water glasses jump. But Marcus sat perfectly still, waiting for the storm to pass, remembering Olivia's words about courage. It's about being terrified and doing the thing anyway. He was terrified. His hands were shaking under the table, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. But he didn't run, didn't back down, didn't retreat to safety. "You'll destroy us," Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll tank the stock price. You'll lose us billions. I'll honor grandfather's legacy," Marcus interrupted. "I'll take this company back to what it was meant to be. We'll build again instead of just buying and selling. We'll invest in communities instead of extracting value from them. We'll prove that it's possible to be successful and decent at the same time." "That's fantasy," Richard spat. "That's naive, childish. That's what I'm going to do." Marcus stood, gathering his papers. "I own 51% of this company. Grandfather made sure of that before he died. He wanted me to have control because he believed." His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed through. He believed I could do better than this. Better than we've been. He walked toward the door, done with the meeting, done with the fighting, ready to start the real work. "If you do this," Richard called after him. "If you refuse to sign, you're on your own. No more help from me. No more advice. No more safety net." Marcus paused at the door, looking back at his father. This man who had raised him, who had taught him everything about business and nothing about purpose, who had turned his grandfather's dream into a machine that generated wealth but destroyed meaning in the process. "I know," Marcus said. "That's exactly what I need." 3 hours later, Marcus stood outside Jefferson High School, watching students stream through the gates as the final bell rang. The building was old, worn, marked by decades of budget cuts and neglect. Paint peeled from window frames. The athletic field was more dirt than grass. The chain-link fence around the perimeter sagged in places, held together more by determination than structural integrity. But the students who poured through those doors were alive with energy, laughing, shouting, arguing, flirting, being 15 and messy and hopeful and real. Marcus didn't know if this was Olivia's school. He'd had Jenkins pull the list of schools in the district, and this one had seemed right. The location matched roughly with where the bus had been heading, and something about it called to him, reminded him of the passion in Olivia's voice when she talked about her students. He was about to turn away, accepting that he'd probably never see her again, that she'd been a moment in a storm rather than a chapter in a story. When he saw her, she emerged from a side entrance, still wearing that blue cardigan despite the warm afternoon sun, her bag heavy with what he assumed were more papers to grade. She was talking to a student, a young girl with dark hair and a defensive posture that suggested she trusted the world about as far as she could throw it. Maya, Marcus thought, though he had no way of knowing if that was true. Olivia said something that made the girl's expression soften slightly, just a fraction, a small crack in carefully constructed armor. Then she hugged her, quick but fierce, and the girl hurried away, glancing back once before disappearing around the corner. Marcus must have made some movement, some sound, because Olivia's head turned and their eyes met across the 50 feet of cracked concrete that separated them. Her face registered shock, then confusion, then something else he couldn't quite read. She walked toward him slowly, like she was approaching something that might bolt if she moved too fast. "Marcus?" she said when she was close enough. "What are you doing here?" He realized he didn't have a good answer. "I wanted to see you again." "How did you find me?" "I made an educated guess about which school you teach at, based on the bus route and the neighborhood you mentioned, and..." He stopped, aware that it sounded like stalking. "That sounds creepy." "I promise I'm not a creep." "That's exactly what a creep would say," Olivia pointed out, but there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. "Fair point." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that felt foreign to him. When was the last time he'd been nervous around someone? "Look, I know this is strange, showing up like this, but last night, what you said about your students, about caring, about doing work that matters, it stuck with me. It changed something, and I wanted to thank you for that." Olivia studied him, her expression unreadable. "You're welcome, though I'm not sure I did anything worth thanking. You reminded me why I got into this business in the first place, why my grandfather built what he built. You reminded me that money is supposed to be a tool, not a purpose." "Deep thoughts for a Thursday afternoon," she said lightly, but he could see the curiosity in her eyes, the question she wasn't quite asking. Marcus took a breath, making a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "Can I buy you coffee? I'd like to talk to you about something. A business proposition, actually." Her eyebrows rose. "Now you sound like a creep and someone trying to sell me a timeshare." He laughed, surprised by how good it felt. "I promise it's neither. It's about your school and your students, and a foundation I'm establishing." That got her attention. What kind of foundation? The kind that helps kids like Maya Rodriguez. The kind that gives teachers like you the resources you need to actually do your job instead of spending your own money on supplies and grading papers and bus stops. Olivia's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "How do you know Maya's name?" "You told me last night." "I told you her first name, not her last name." Marcus felt the ground shift under his feet, realizing his mistake. My company has resources. I had someone compile information about the foster care system, about schools that serve at-risk youth. Her name came up. You investigated my student? Olivia's voice was cold now, her entire posture changing from curious to defensive. You had someone look into a 15-year-old girl because I mentioned her in conversation? No, it's not like that. I wasn't investigating her specifically. I was trying to understand the system, to figure out how to help. Help. Olivia stepped back, putting distance between them. You want to help? Then respect their privacy. Respect their dignity. Don't treat them like research subjects for your guilty conscience. That's not what I'm doing, Marcus protested. But even as he said it, he could hear how it sounded, could see himself through her eyes. Some rich guy who got inspired during a rainstorm and now wanted to play savior, without understanding the first thing about the people he claimed to want to help. I think you should go, Olivia said quietly. And I think you should delete whatever file you have on Maya. And any other student at this school, and maybe consider that good intentions aren't the same thing as good actions. Olivia, please. Ms. Chen, she corrected. And no, I don't need coffee, and I don't need whatever you're selling. What I need is for you to leave my students alone. She turned and walked away, her back straight, her steps purposeful, leaving Marcus standing alone in front of school feeling like he'd just failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. But as he watched her go, as he processed her anger and recognized the justice in it, Marcus found himself smiling slightly despite the rejection, because she was right, and because she just taught him something more valuable than any business school could have, that helping people wasn't about imposing your vision on them, but about listening to what they actually needed, respecting their autonomy, honoring their dignity. He'd screwed this up spectacularly, but he could learn, he could do better. And he wasn't giving up. Not on this. Not on the foundation. Not on the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he could prove to Olivia Chen that he was capable of being more than another rich guy with good intentions and no follow-through. Marcus pulled out his phone and made another call. Jenkins, he said when his head of security answered. Delete everything we compiled on individual students. All of it. I want those files gone. Sir, I made a mistake. We approached this wrong. From now on, if we're going to help, we do it the right way, transparently, respectfully, in partnership with the people who actually know what these communities need. No more research. No more files. Just conversation and collaboration. Understood. Understood, sir. Marcus ended the call and took one last look at Jefferson High School, at its peeling paint and sagging fence and determined students, and made a promise to himself. He'd come back, not as a savior, not as some wealthy benefactor swooping in to fix everything, but as someone willing to listen, to learn, to earn trust instead of assuming it. And maybe, if he was very lucky and worked very hard, he'd get the chance to see Olivia Chen smile at him again. 2 weeks passed, and Marcus threw himself into work with an intensity that surprised even him. He restructured Whitmore Development's priorities, redirecting investments from hostile takeovers into community development projects. He established a Whitmore Legacy Foundation with a simple mission, to support education and opportunity for underserved youth, with a focus on letting communities define their own needs rather than having solutions imposed on them. The business world thought he'd lost his mind. Stock prices dipped. Investors grumbled. His father stopped speaking to him entirely. Marcus had never been happier. But happiness came with frustration, because despite everything he was building, despite the foundation taking shape and the projects getting started, he couldn't stop thinking about Olivia, about her anger, about the disappointment in her eyes when she'd realized he'd crossed a line he hadn't even known existed. He wanted to apologize, wanted to explain, wanted to prove that he'd learned from his mistake. But he also knew that showing up at her school again would be exactly the wrong move, would confirm every negative assumption she'd probably made about him. So he waited, and worked, and hoped that somehow, fate would give him another chance. It came on a Saturday morning at a farmer's market in downtown Los Angeles. Marcus had started visiting the market as part of his new routine, a weekly reminder to stay connected to the real world, to the rhythms of normal life that he'd been insulated from for too long. He was examining organic tomatoes. Try to remember if there was actually a difference between heirloom and regular varieties. When he heard a familiar voice. Those are overpriced. You can get better ones at the stand near the end for half the cost. He turned, and there she was. Olivia stood a few feet away, wearing jeans and a green t-shirt that said, "Teachers change the world," in faded letters. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she held a reusable shopping bag filled with vegetables. She looked relaxed in a way she hadn't at the bus stop or the school, like this was her territory, her element. "Olivia," Marcus said, then corrected himself. "Ms. Chen." "It's Saturday," she said. "You can call me Olivia. And before you ask, no, I'm not following you. I've been coming to this market for 5 years." "I just started," Marcus admitted. "I'm probably doing it wrong. I bought 3 types of kale last week, without realizing they were all basically the same thing." Despite herself, Olivia smiled. "Yeah, that sounds about right for someone who probably has people shop for them." "Had," Marcus corrected. "Past tense. I fired my house staff." Her eyebrows rose. "You fired them?" "Well, I gave them excellent severance packages and glowing references and helped them all find new positions. But yes, I decided I should probably learn how to take care of myself like an actual adult." "How's that going?" "I burned scrambled eggs yesterday. I didn't know that was possible." This time, Olivia laughed, a real, genuine sound that made Marcus's chest feel warm. "That's actually impressive in a terrible sort of way." They stood there for a moment, the farmer's market bustling around them, vendors calling out prices and samples, families with strollers navigating the crowded aisles. Marcus felt like they were in a bubble, separate from everything else. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "What I did, having someone look into your student, that was wrong. It was invasive and presumptuous, and I'm sorry." Olivia's expression sobered. "Thank you for saying that. I've deleted everything, and I've changed how the foundation approaches things. We're working with community leaders now, with teachers and principals and people who actually know what they're talking about. We're not making assumptions or imposing solutions." "That's good," Olivia said carefully. "But why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know I heard you. When you said I needed to respect people's dignity, to treat them as partners rather than projects, I heard you, and I'm trying to do better." Olivia studied him for a long moment, and Marcus felt himself being evaluated, weighed, measured against some internal standard he couldn't see. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "I believe you're trying." It wasn't forgiveness, not quite, but it was something, an opening, a possibility. "Can I buy you coffee?" Marcus asked. "No business propositions this time. Just coffee. And maybe you can teach me which vegetables I'm supposed to actually buy at this place." Olivia hesitated, clearly torn between caution and curiosity. "Why do you want to have coffee with me, Marcus?" "Honestly, because talking to you that night in the bus stop was the most real conversation I've had in years. Because you challenged me and called me out and made me think about things I'd stopped questioning. And because I'd really like to get to know you better, if you'll let me. That's a lot of honesty for a Saturday morning. I'm practicing. Turns out I spent a lot of years not saying what I actually meant." Olivia shifted her shopping bag to her other hand, considering. "1 coffee," she said finally. "But I'm paying for my own, and if at any point you start acting like a creepy rich guy, I'm out." "Deal," Marcus agreed, relief flooding through him. They found a small cafe at the edge of the market. Nothing fancy, just mismatched chairs and strong coffee and the smell of fresh pastries. Olivia ordered plain black coffee. "I'm a teacher. I can't afford fancy drinks," she explained, while Marcus got the same, even though he usually preferred lattes. They sat outside, watching the market crowds flow past, and for a while, neither of them spoke. "So," Olivia said eventually, "you really fired your entire household staff?" "I really did. Well, except for Jenkins, my head of security. Turns out when you're a billionaire, you need at least one person making sure you don't get kidnapped." Olivia choked on her coffee. "I'm sorry. Did you just casually mention being a billionaire?" Marcus winced. "Was that not clear? You said you worked in corporate management." That's a pretty significant understatement. Would you have talked to me if I'd led with, "Hi, I'm Marcus Whitmore. My net worth is approximately $32 billion. Whitmore, Olivia repeated, her eyes widening. As in Whitmore Development? As in the billionaire family that's always in the business news. That's the one. She set down her coffee cup very carefully, like she was worried she might throw it. You let me talk about overpriced tomatoes. You let me think you were just some guy. I am just some guy, Marcus protested. The money doesn't change that. Marcus, Olivia said slowly, there are people who would argue that $32 billion changes everything. He couldn't deny that. Money did change things. Change how people looked at you, talked to you, what they wanted from you. It created distance, even when you didn't want it. That night at the bus stop, Marcus said quietly, you saw me, not my bank account, not my company. Just me, soaked from the rain and lost, and trying to figure out what I was doing with my life. That's why I wanted to see you again, because you're one of the few people who's ever done that. Olivia was quiet for a long moment, processing. Is that also why you walked out of that board meeting? The night we met. How did you? Marcus paused. Right. If you know my name now, you probably Google me. The business news had a field day with it, Olivia confirmed. Billionaire heir walks out on multi-billion-dollar merger, sends stock prices into chaos, reportedly having a quarter-life crisis despite being 35. 34, Marcus corrected. And it wasn't a crisis. It was a clarity, caused by something your students wrote about courage. He nodded. And by you, the way you talked about your work, about caring, about doing things that matter. It made me realize I'd lost my way, that I'd been so focused on success by other people's definitions that I'd forgotten to define it for myself. Olivia leaned back in her chair, studying him with those deep brown eyes that seemed to see straight through whatever defenses he tried to maintain. So you blew up your life, turned your company upside down, started a foundation, fired your staff, all because of a random conversation in a storm. It wasn't random, Marcus said. It was exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed it. Sometimes that's how change works. Not through careful planning or gradual evolution, but through moments that crack you open and force you to see things differently. That's very philosophical for someone who burns scrambled eggs. He laughed. I contain multitudes. Also, do you have any tips for not burning eggs? Because I'm getting tired of cereal for breakfast. And just like that, the tension broke. Olivia smiled, shaking her head. Low heat. Patience. And for God's sake, don't walk away from the stove. That feels like a metaphor. Everything's a metaphor if you think about it hard enough. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing easily now that the shock of his identity had worn off. Olivia told him about her students, about the small victories and constant frustrations of teaching in an underfunded school. Marcus told her about his grandfather, about the plans he was making to redirect Whitmore Development toward projects that actually help communities rather than just extracting value from them. It won't be easy, Olivia warned. Changing a culture, especially in a big company. People resist. They like the familiar, even when the familiar isn't working. Are you speaking from experience? I've been trying to reform the English curriculum at my school for 3 years. You'd think I was suggesting we burn books instead of just adding more diverse authors. Change is hard, even when everyone agrees it's necessary. But you keep trying. What else am I going to do? Give up? Let things stay broken because fixing them is difficult. Olivia shook her head. That's not who I am. Marcus felt that now familiar sensation in his chest. That combination of admiration and attraction, and something deeper he wasn't quite ready to name. That's courage, he said softly. What Maya wrote about. Being terrified but doing the thing anyway. We're all terrified, Olivia replied. Anyone who says they're not is either lying or not paying attention. Their coffee was long finished, but neither of them moved to leave. The sun was higher now, the market reaching its peak afternoon bustle, and Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd spent a Saturday morning doing absolutely nothing productive except talking to someone who made him want to be better. Can I see you again? He asked. Not at a farmer's market or a bus stop. Somewhere intentional. Olivia bit her lip, clearly uncertain. Marcus, this is complicated. You're a billionaire. I'm a public school teacher. We live in completely different worlds. So I don't do complicated well. I don't have time for games or drama or whatever this might turn into. What if it doesn't have to be complicated? Marcus leaned forward. What if we just see each other because we enjoy talking? Because we make each other think? Because there's something here worth exploring, even if it doesn't make sense on paper. Nothing about this makes sense on paper. Then we don't use paper. Olivia laughed, but there was uncertainty in it. You're persistent. I prefer determined. That's the same thing. Is it working? She looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus held his breath, aware that this moment mattered, that her answer would shape everything that came next. One dinner, she said finally, somewhere normal, not some fancy restaurant with a 3-month wait list. Somewhere regular people eat. I can do that, Marcus said, trying not to sound too eager and probably failing. And you pay for yourself. I'm not interested in... I'll pay for myself, he interrupted. Scout's honor. Were you a Boy Scout? No, but I could have been. If my parents hadn't thought scouting was beneath our social status. Olivia snorted. Your life sounds exhausting. It was, Marcus agreed. That's why I'm changing it. She stood, gathering her shopping bag, and Marcus rose with her. They walked back through the market together, Olivia pausing occasionally to examine produce or chat with vendors who clearly knew her. Marcus watched her move through the space. Confident, comfortable, beloved by people who valued her for who she was rather than what she had, and felt something settle in his chest. This was what he wanted. This sense of being part of something real, something grounded in authentic relationships rather than transactional exchanges. At the market's edge, where they'd have to part ways, Olivia turned to him. Thursday, she said, 7 p.m. There's a Thai place on Sunset Boulevard, nothing fancy. Probably the least fancy place in the city, actually. I'll find it, Marcus promised. And Marcus, she fixed him with a serious look. Don't send anyone to research it first. Don't have your security team check it out. Don't do anything except show up like a normal person. I can do that. We'll see, Olivia said, but she was smiling as she walked away, and Marcus watched her go with a lightness in his step he hadn't felt in years. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. Marcus spent the intervening days trying to be a normal person preparing for a normal date, which was harder than it sounded. He had to resist the urge to send flowers to Olivia's school too much. He had to talk himself out of having Jenkins research the restaurant's menu and reviews creepy. He had to actually figure out what normal people wore on dates because his entire wardrobe was either designer suits or the ratty college t-shirts he discovered in his closet. In the end, he settled on dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Nothing designer, nothing that screamed wealth. He took an Uber instead of his car, not wanting to show up in something that cost more than most people's houses. The Thai restaurant was exactly as Olivia had described. Not fancy, crammed with mismatched tables and chairs, smelling gloriously of curry and lemongrass and spice. String lights hung from the ceiling, and a small Buddha statue sat near the entrance, draped with fresh flowers. Olivia was already there, waiting at a corner table, wearing a simple black dress that somehow made her look more beautiful than any of the designer gowns he'd seen at galas and fundraisers. She left her hair down, and it fell in soft waves around her shoulders. You found it, she said as he approached. GPS is a miracle, Marcus replied, sliding into the seat across from her. And you came alone. No security detail lurking outside. Jenkins is in the car across the street, but he promised to be discreet. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Okay, fine. There are some things I can't compromise on. The head of my security would literally quit if I went out alone at night. Fair enough. I suppose being absurdly wealthy comes with certain non-negotiable realities. Sadly, yes. A server appeared, a tiny elderly woman who called them both sweetie and recommended dishes with absolute authority. They ordered based entirely on her suggestions, and Marcus found himself relaxing in a way he usually didn't on dates, which historically had been performances. Carefully choreographed events where both parties knew their roles. This felt different. Felt real. "So," Olivia said once the food arrived, "tell me about your grandfather, the one who started the company." Marcus set down his fork, surprised by the question. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Why he built what he built, what he believed in, why his legacy matters so much to you." So Marcus told her about his grandfather, Thomas Whitmore, who had grown up poor in the Depression, who had learned construction working on WPA projects, who had built his first house with his own hand for a family who couldn't afford a traditional mortgage, about how Thomas had turned that first house into a business built on the radical idea that everyone deserved a decent place to live, regardless of their income or social status. He used to say that housing wasn't just about shelter, Marcus explained. It was about dignity, about giving people a foundation to build their lives on. He believed that successful businesses had a responsibility to lift their communities up, not extract wealth from them. "Sounds like you would have gotten along well with my students," Olivia said softly. "I think you would have loved them." He had this thing he used to say, that the measure of society wasn't how it treated its wealthiest members, but how it treated its most vulnerable ones. That's beautiful. It's also not very profitable, which is why my father spent the last 20 years systematically dismantling everything my grandfather built. Marcus heard the bitterness in his voice and tried to rein it in. "Sorry, family drama is probably not great first date conversation." "It's fine," Olivia said. "And for what it's worth, I think what you're doing, trying to honor his legacy, trying to change your company's direction, that takes courage too." Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. "Coming from you, that means a lot." "Why from me?" "Because you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. You show up every day for kids who society has written off. You pour yourself into work that doesn't pay enough and doesn't get enough respect. And you do it anyway because it matters. That's courage." Olivia looked down at her plate, and Marcus thought he saw a color rise in her cheeks. "It's just teaching. It's not just anything. It's everything. Those kids you teach, they're going to remember you for the rest of their lives. The ones who make it, who succeed despite everything stacked against them. They're going to look back and remember the teacher who believed in them when nobody else did. I don't do it for gratitude. I know. That's what makes it matter." They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments, and Marcus found himself studying Olivia's face, memorizing the small details. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she concentrated, the slight scar on her chin that he hadn't noticed before, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her students. "Can I ask you something?" Olivia said suddenly. "Anything." "That night at the bus stop, when I asked what you did and you gave me that vague answer about corporate management, were you testing me? To see if I'd treat you differently if I knew who you really were." Marcus considered lying, giving her some sanitized version that made him look better. But he'd promised himself honesty, had promised her respect. "Maybe a little," he admitted. "Not consciously. But there's always this thing, when you have money like I do, where you wonder if people like you for you, or for what you can give them. I think part of me wanted to be just Marcus for a few minutes, not Marcus Whitmore the billionaire. That must be lonely." "It is," he said quietly. "It's incredibly lonely." Olivia reached across the table and put her hand over his, and the contact sent electricity through his skin. "For what it's worth," she said, "I like you better as just Marcus. The billionaire part is kind of intimidating, actually." "Don't be intimidated. I'm still the guy who burned scrambled eggs." That is weirdly reassuring. They talked through dinner, through dessert, through 2 pots of tea, and the gentle hints from their server that maybe they should think about leaving since there were people waiting. They talked about books and movies and what it was like growing up in completely different worlds. Marcus in mansions with nannies and private tutors. Olivia in a small apartment with a single mom who worked double shifts as a nurse. "She was my hero," Olivia said when Marcus asked about her mother. "Still is, actually. She gave me everything she had and never complained, never made me feel like I was a burden. When I told her I want to be a teacher, she just smiled and said, 'Good. The world needs people who care more about making a difference than making money.' She sounds amazing." She is. She still works too hard. Still won't let me help her as much as I want to. She's proud like that. You should bring her to the foundation gala, Marcus said without thinking. Olivia pulled back slightly. What foundation gala? The Whitmore Legacy Foundation is having its launch event next month. I'm inviting teachers, community leaders, students, people who actually do the work we're trying to support. It would mean a lot to have you there. Marcus, Just think about it, he interrupted. No pressure. But I'd really like you to see what I'm building. What you inspired, honestly. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. Something complex moving across her face. You can't say things like that, she said finally. Why not? Because it makes it very hard for me to maintain my professional distance and not get swept up in whatever this is. What if I don't want you to maintain professional distance? Marcus asked softly. What if I want you to get swept up? That's terrifying. Good. That means it matters. The restaurant had emptied around them, and when Marcus finally looked at his phone, he was shocked to see it was nearly midnight. For hours had passed in what felt like minutes. I should go, Olivia said reluctantly. I have school tomorrow, and if I don't get at least 6 hours of sleep, I'll be useless. Let me drive you home. I can take the bus. Olivia, it's midnight. Please let me drive you home. If not me, then Jenkins. I promise he doesn't bite. She hesitated, clearly torn between independence and practicality. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but just this once. Just this once, Marcus agreed, though they both knew it was a lie. Jenkins was, as promised, waiting discreetly across the street. He drove them to Olivia's apartment, a modest building in a neighborhood that made Marcus acutely aware of the gulf between their worlds. And Marcus walked her to her door like this was a movie from the 1950s, and he was worried about propriety. Thank you for tonight, Olivia said, her key in hand but not yet turning it. I had a really good time. Me too. Can I see you again? Marcus, I know it's complicated. I know we're from different worlds. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this doesn't make sense. He stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. But I also know that when I'm with you, I feel more like myself than I have in years. So yes, it's complicated, but I'd really like to try anyway, if you will. Olivia looked up at him, and in the dim porch light, her eyes were impossibly deep. One more date, she said. Let's see how it goes. I'll take it. She smiled, unlocked her door, then paused. Marcus. Yeah, for what it's worth, when I'm with you, I feel like maybe the world is a little less impossible than I usually think it is. And that's worth something. Before he could respond, she leaned up and kissed his cheek. Quick, soft, devastating. Then disappeared inside, leaving Marcus standing on her porch with his heart pounding and his entire world feeling like it had tilted on its axis. Jenkins was tactfully silent on the drive back to Marcus's apartment, but Marcus caught him smiling in the rear-view mirror. Not a word, Marcus warned. Wouldn't dream of it, sir. Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a text before he could second-guess himself. Thank you for tonight. Already looking forward to next time. Her response came a minute later. Me too. Don't burn anything for breakfast tomorrow. Marcus laughed, and suddenly the future, what had seemed so uncertain and frightening just weeks ago, felt full of possibility. The next one more date turned into another, and suddenly Marcus and Olivia were seeing each other 3 times a week, stealing hours between her classes and his meetings, building something that felt both fragile and inevitable. They kept it quiet first, both acutely aware of what would happen if the press got wind of Marcus Whitmore dating a public school teacher. The tabloids would eat it alive, would turn it into some kind of Cinderella story or class warfare narrative, would reduce everything they were building to a soundbite. So they were careful, met in out-of-the-way places, avoided anywhere photographers might lurk, kept their relationship contained to moments stolen from the world's prying eyes. But secrets have a way of coming to light. It started with a photo. Marcus had convinced Olivia to let him take her to a museum on a Sunday afternoon. The Getty Center, he'd argued, where they could look at art and walk the gardens and pretend to be normal people on a normal date. She'd agreed reluctantly. worried about being seen, but also unable to resist the promise of a few hours in beautiful surroundings. They'd been careful, had stayed away from the main galleries where tour groups gathered, had found a quiet corner near a Monet where they could talk in low voices about color and light, and whether Impressionism was really just an excuse to not have to paint details. And someone had taken a picture. It showed up online 2 days later, on a gossip site that specialized in celebrity sightings and billionaire drama. The photo was grainy but clear enough. Marcus Whitmore, heir to a multi-billion-dollar fortune, looking at a painting with an unidentified woman whose hand was clasped in his. The speculation began immediately. Who is Marcus Whitmore's mystery woman? Billionaire's new romance signals complete lifestyle change. Sources say Whitmore has found love outside his social circle. By the end of the day, someone had identified Olivia. By the end of the week, her school had been swarmed by reporters, and Olivia had stopped answering Marcus's calls. Marcus stood outside Jefferson High School for the second time, but this time was different. This time, he'd been invited, though summoned, might be a better word for the terse text Olivia had finally sent him after a week of silence. We need to talk. School. After classes. Come to the main office. He'd canceled 3 meetings and left Jenkins in the car, knowing that showing up with security would only make things worse. The secretary in the main office had looked at him with barely concealed hostility before directing him to a classroom on the 2nd floor. Olivia was waiting there, sitting at her desk with that familiar stack of papers, but her shoulders were tense in a way he'd never seen before. "Hey!" Marcus said softly, closing the door behind him. "Hey!" She didn't look up. "I'm sorry. About the photo, about the press, about all of it. I should have been more careful. It's not your fault." Olivia finally looked at him, and Marcus felt his heart crack at the exhaustion in her eyes. "I knew this could happen. I just didn't think it would be so invasive," Marcus applied. "Humiliating," Olivia corrected. "Do you know what it's been like here? Reporters calling the school, try to get interviews with my students. Parents asking me if I'm using my relationship with you to get funding for the school. Other teachers making comments about gold diggers and social climbing." Marcus felt anger surge through him, hot and protective. "Who said that?" "You'll what? Sue them? By the school? And fire everyone who was mean to me?" "That's exactly the problem, Marcus. Your solution to everything is money and power, and that doesn't work here. That just makes it worse. Then tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this." "You can't fix it." Olivia's voice rose. Then she caught herself, lowering it again. "This is my life, Marcus. These are my students, my colleagues, my community. And now I'm that teacher dating the billionaire. And everything I work for, everything I built here, it's all being reframed through that lens. So what are you saying?" Marcus felt cold despite the warm classroom. "That we should end this?" "I'm saying I don't know if I can do this. If I can handle being your world, being scrutinized and judged and having every aspect of my life picked apart by strangers." "You wouldn't be in my world," Marcus protested. "I left that world. I'm building something different now, something that actually matters, and I want you to be part of that. But you can't ever fully leave it, can you?" Olivia stood, pacing to the window. "You're always going to be Marcus Whitmore, billionaire. You're always going to have more money than God, and more power than most people dream of. And I'm always going to be just a teacher. You are not just anything," Marcus said fiercely. "You're extraordinary. You change lives every single day. You matter more than any business deal I've ever closed." "Do I?" Olivia turned to face him. "Because right now, it feels like I'm a liability. Like being with me is making your life complicated in ways you didn't sign up for. You think this is about convenience? About what's easy?" Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her. "Olivia, you've turned my entire world upside down. You've made me question everything I thought I knew about success and purpose, and what I want my life to be. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, the press is invasive and awful. But none of that changes how I feel about you. And how do you feel about me?" Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. Marcus knew this was the moment, the precipice. He could step back, could give her the space she was asking for, could make this easier by making it less. Or he could tell the truth. "I'm in love with you," he said. "I'm in love with your passion and your courage and the way you care about your students like they're your own children. I'm in love with how you challenge me and call me out and refuse to let me hide behind money or privilege. I'm in love with the person I become when I'm with you. Someone better, someone real, someone who might actually be worthy of the grandfather I'm trying to honor." Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus, you don't have to say it back. You don't have to feel the same way. But I needed you to know, because I'm not giving up on this, on us, unless you explicitly tell me to. And even then, I'll probably spend the rest of my life trying to change your mind." A tear slipped down Olivia's cheek, and Marcus wiped it away with his thumb, the gesture intimate and tender and full of all the things he couldn't quite say. "I'm scared," Olivia admitted. "I'm terrified that this ends with me getting hurt, with losing myself in your world, with becoming someone I don't recognize. Then we don't let that happen. We set boundaries. We protect what matters. We build something that works for both of us, not just me." "Is that even possible?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly, "but I'd really like to try and find out." Olivia searched his face for a long moment, and Marcus held his breath, aware that his entire future hung on whatever she decided in this classroom that smelled of chalk dust and old books and teenage dreams. "Okay," she said finally, "but we do this my way. No more sneaking around, no more trying to hide. If we're doing this, we're honest about it. And you have to respect that I have a life and a career that matter to me, that I'm not going to just become Marcus Whitmore's girlfriend. I would never want you to be just that. And you have to promise me something else. Anything. Promise me that when this gets hard, and it will get hard, you won't try to fix it with money. That you'll actually talk to me, listen to me, treat me like an equal partner. I promise," Marcus said solemnly. "Though you should know that learning to not solve everything with money is probably going to be a lifelong journey for me." Olivia laughed, watery but genuine. "As long as you're trying." Marcus pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, pressing her face against his chest. He could feel her heartbeat, quick and uncertain, matching his own. "I love you too," she murmured against his shirt. "In case that wasn't obvious. I'm completely terrified and probably making a huge mistake, but I love you. Best mistake you'll ever make," Marcus promised. "That remains to be seen." They stood there in the classroom as afternoon light slanted to the windows, painting everything gold, and Marcus thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The storm, the bus stop, the farmer's market, the dinner, the museum. How each one had been a choice, a step toward each other, a decision to take a risk on something unknown. "So what now?" Olivia asked. "Now we do this right. No more hiding. I'll release a statement tomorrow, confirming that we're together, asking for privacy, making it clear that you're not some PR stunt or phase. That'll just make the press more interested. Probably, but at least we'll control the narrative. And maybe, if we're honest and boring enough, they'll get tired and move on to someone else." "Boring?" Olivia pulled back to look at him. "Is that what we're aiming for?" "Consistently, boringly happy," Marcus confirmed. "That's the goal. I can work with that." The press conference was Marcus's idea, though Olivia had insisted on being part of it. They held it at the Whitmore Legacy Foundation's office, a deliberately modest space in a mixed-use building. Nothing like the gleaming corporate headquarters where Whitmore Development still operated. Marcus wore a simple suit, no tie. Olivia wore her teacher clothes, comfortable pants, and a blouse that didn't scream wealth or fashion. They sat side by side at a table facing a room full of reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers. Jenkins lurked in the back, ready to escort out anyone who got aggressive. Marcus could feel Olivia trembling slightly beside him, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "We're here because our privacy has been invaded," she began, reading from notes she'd written herself, refusing Marcus's offer to have his PR team draft something. "And we want to set the record straight. Yes, Marcus and I are in a relationship. No, it's not a publicity stunt. No, I'm not interested in his money. And no, we're not going to discuss the intimate details of our personal lives. "Ms. Chun," a reporter called out, "how did you meet Mr. Whitmore?" "In a bus stop during a rainstorm," Olivia replied. "We talked about teaching and courage and what makes life meaningful. He didn't tell me who he was at first, and I didn't care when I found out. But surely the financial disparity between you is nobody's business but ours," Olivia interrupted. "I'm a teacher. I'm proud of that. I love my work and my students. The fact that Marcus has more money than me doesn't change who I am or what I value." "Mr. Whitmore," another reporter jumped in, "your father reportedly disapproves of this relationship. Can you comment?" Marcus felt Olivia tense beside him. This was the part they discussed, the part where things could get messy. "My father and I disagree about many things," Marcus said carefully, "including the direction of Whitmore development and what success looks like. But my personal life is my own, and I don't need his approval or anyone else's. Is it true you're planning to propose?" "Is it true you've already proposed and been rejected? What about children? Do you plan to have?" "That's enough." Jenkins's voice cut through the din and the questions died down. "Mr. Whitmore and Ms. Chun have made their statement. This press conference is over." They stood, Marcus taking Olivia's hand publicly for the first time, and walked out together while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions they didn't answer. In the car, Olivia let out a long breath. "Well, that was awful." "It was," Marcus agreed, "but it's done. And now maybe they'll leave us alone." "You don't really believe that." "No, but I can hope." They didn't leave them alone, of course. The story became bigger than either of them had anticipated. Not just a billionaire dating a teacher, but a symbol of something people wanted to believe in. The idea that someone could walk away from wealth and power to find something real. The fantasy of two people from different worlds building something together. Olivia's students became obsessed with it, suddenly seeing their teacher as some kind of romantic heroine. Maya Rodriguez, in particular, seemed both thrilled and protective. "You really love him?" she asked Olivia one day after class. "I really do," Olivia confirmed. "Good. Because if he hurts you, me and the whole 10th grade are going to have word with him, billionaire or not." It was the parents who were more complicated. Some were supportive, thrilled that their children's teacher had found love. Others were suspicious, worried about conflict of interest, about whether Olivia could still be trusted to treat all students fairly if she was connected to that much money. The school board called a meeting. Marcus wanted to attend, to defend Olivia, to use his influence to shut down any attempts to force her out. But Olivia had been firm. This was her fight, her career, and she needed to handle it herself. So Marcus waited in his office, staring at his phone, resisting the urge to call every 5 minutes. When Olivia finally called, 3 hours after the meeting had started, he answered before the first ring finished. "How did it go?" "I keep my job," Olivia said, and he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "But I have to maintain professional boundaries. Can't use my relationship with you to seek special treatment for the school, and need to disclose any potential conflict of interest." "That's reasonable." "It's humiliating," Olivia corrected. "None of the other teachers have to do any of that. But I agree because fighting it would have made things worse." "I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing. This isn't your fault." "It kind of is, though. If you weren't with me, if I weren't with you, I'd be grading papers alone in my apartment and wondering if this is all there is to life." Olivia interrupted. "Yes, dating you is complicated. Yes, it's made some things harder. But it's also made me happier than I've been in years, and I'm not giving that up just because it's difficult." Marcus felt warm flood through him. "I love you. I know. Now come pick me up. I'm exhausted and starving, and I want terrible takeout and a terrible movie and to not think about any of this for at least 3 hours. I can do that." They fell into a rhythm over the following weeks. Marcus threw himself into the foundation, working with community leaders to identify schools and programs that needed support. He insisted on transparency, on partnership rather than charity, on listening to what people actually needed instead of assuming he knew best. Olivia continued teaching, continued pouring herself into her students, continued being exactly who she'd always been. But she also started attending foundation events with Marcus, started using her position to advocate for educational reform, started building bridges between her world and his. They fought sometimes about money, about priorities, about the fundamental differences in how they'd grown up and what they valued. But they also talked through those fights, learned from them, grew stronger because of them. "You're changing me," Marcus told her one night as they sat on her small apartment balcony, sharing cheap wine and watching the city lights. "Is that a good thing?" "The best thing. You make me want to be the person my grandfather believed I could be." "You were always that person," Olivia said. "You just needed permission to let yourself become him." "Is that what you gave me? Permission?" "No. I gave you a mirror. You did the rest yourself." Marcus kissed her then, slow and deep, tasting wine and contentment, and a future he was finally ready to believe in. The Whitmore Legacy Foundation's launch gala was scheduled for a Friday evening in late November, and Marcus had never been more nervous about an event in his life. This wasn't like the corporate fundraisers he'd attended his entire life. Stiff affairs where wealthy people wrote checks to feel good about themselves before returning to lives of excess. This was supposed to be different. Real. Meaningful. The guest list reflected that. Yes, there were donors, wealthy individuals and corporations that Marcus had convinced to invest in the foundation's mission. But there were also teachers from a dozen different schools, students who had benefited from early foundation programs, community leaders who had partnered with them to identify needs and solutions. And Olivia's mother. "She's gonna hate me," Marcus predicted as he adjusted his tie for the 7th time. "She's not gonna hate you," Olivia assured him, though she looked nervous too. "She's just protective and skeptical of wealth, and possibly still traumatized by the time she saw you on the news being called America's Most Eligible Billionaire. That was one magazine. One time. And I didn't ask them to." "I know." Olivia smoothed down his lapel, her touch calming him despite his anxiety. "Just be yourself. That's who she needs to meet." The gala was held at a repurposed warehouse that the foundation had helped convert into a community center. The space was beautiful but not ostentatious, exposed brick and industrial lighting, with student artwork displayed on the walls and a small stage where scholarship recipients would share their stories. Marcus had insisted that the evening focus on the people and programs being supported, not on him or the foundation's wealthy donors. No plaques with donor names. No recognition ceremonies. Just stories and connections, and the real work being done. Olivia arrived with her mother, a petite woman with Olivia's eyes and a spine of pure steel. Marcus could tell from across the room. "Mr. Whitmore," she said when Olivia introduced him, her handshake firm but not warm. "I've heard a great deal about you. Please call me Marcus. And I hope some of what you've heard was good. Some of it." Dr. Chen, she was a nurse practitioner, Marcus had learned, with 30 years of experience in emergency medicine, studied him with the same intensity her daughter had shown that first night in the bus stop. "My daughter tells me you're sincere, that you actually care about the work, not just the publicity." "I am. I do." Marcus met her gaze directly. "Your daughter changed my life. She reminded me that success isn't measured in profit margins, but in lives improved, communities strengthened, opportunities created. Everything I'm trying to build with this foundation starts from that premise." "Pretty words." "True words," Marcus corrected gently. "But I understand if you need to see actions before you believe them. I would in your position." Something in Dr. Chen's expression shifted slightly. Not quite approval, but maybe the beginning of respect. "My daughter also tells me you love her." "I do. Very much. And you understand that if you hurt her, I don't care how much money you have or how many lawyers you can afford. I will make your life extremely unpleasant." "Mom." Olivia looked mortified, but Marcus smiled. "I understand completely. And for what it's worth, I think the world needs more mothers like you, ones who fight for their daughters and refuse to be intimidated by wealth or power." Dr. Chen studied him for another long moment, then nodded. "We'll see, Mr. Whitmore. We'll see." She moved away to examine the student artwork, and Olivia squeezed Marcus's hand. "That actually went better than I expected." "Really? Because I feel like I just barely passed a test I didn't know I was taking. Welcome having a family that actually cares about more than your portfolio value. Before Marcus could respond, Jenkins appeared at his elbow. Sir, we have a situation. Marcus's stomach dropped. What kind of situation? Your father is here. Richard Whitmore stood in the center of the warehouse, looking completely out of place in his $1,000 suit and visible disdain. He was surrounded by a small group of people, board members from Whitmore Development, Marcus realized, along with several major investors. Marcus, Richard said as his son approached. Quite the little show you put together. Father, I didn't expect to see you here. Didn't you? When my son throws a public event, makes a spectacle of himself, threatens to tank the family company's reputation. Of course I'd show up. Marcus felt Olivia come to stand beside him. Felt her presence like armor. This isn't a spectacle. It's a foundation launch. We're celebrating the work we're doing in the community. By parading poor children across a stage, Richard glanced at the program. Having them tell their sob stories to tug at wealthy heartstrings? That's manipulation, Marcus. Not philanthropy. That's showcasing resilience and courage. Olivia interjected, her voice cold. Giving voice to young people who are usually invisible to people like you. Richard turned his attention to her, and his expression was pure condescension. Ah, the schoolteacher. The one who's convinced my son to throw away his birthright for a political statement. The woman I love, Marcus corrected, his voice sharp. And the person who's helped me understand what grandfather was actually trying to build, what I'm trying to honor. Your grandfather was a dreamer who got lucky. I'm the one who turned his small-time construction company into a multi-billion-dollar empire. By abandoning everything he believed in, Marcus shot back. By treating housing as a commodity instead of a right. By extracting maximum profit with minimum concern for the people affected. The nearby guests had started to notice the confrontation, conversations dying down as people turned to watch. Marcus saw Maya Rodriguez standing near the stage, her eyes wide, saw other students, other teachers, all watching this very public family drama unfold. He needed to end this. Now, I think you should leave, Marcus said quietly. This is a public event. It's an invitation-only event, and I'm uninviting you. You can go voluntarily, or I can have security escort you out. Your choice. Richard's face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake, Marcus. This foundation, this girlfriend, this whole performance, it's going to destroy everything I built. And when you fail, when this whole fantasy collapses, don't come running back to me. I won't, Marcus promised. Because I'd rather fail trying to do something meaningful than succeed at something hollow. For a moment, Marcus thought his father might actually take a swing at him. But Richard just shook his head, disgust written across his features. You're weak, he said, just like your grandfather. All heart, no spine. The real world is going to eat you alive. He turned and walked out, his entourage trailing behind him like ducklings following a particularly angry duck. The warehouse was silent in his wake. Then Maya started clapping. Just her at first, slow and deliberate. But then other students joined in and teachers and community leaders until the entire room was applauding. Not for the confrontation itself, but for something deeper. For someone choosing values over convenience. For someone standing up to power with nothing but conviction as armor. Marcus felt Olivia's hand slip into his. Felt her squeeze tight and realized his hands were shaking. You okay? She whispered. I just publicly burned the last bridge to my old life. Good. That bridge was toxic anyway. Marcus laughed, slightly hysterical, and pulled her close. Remind me again why we thought having a public event was a good idea. Because the work matters more than the drama, Olivia said firmly. And because those kids up there, she gestured to the students waiting to speak, they need to know that adults can stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. When did you get so wise? I've always been this wise. You're just finally listening. The evening continued, and despite the dramatic start, it became exactly what Marcus had hoped for. Students shared their stories, not sob stories, as his father called them, but testimonies of resilience and hope. Teachers talked about the difference resources made, how even small investments in supplies and support could transform a classroom. Community leaders discussed partnerships and possibilities. And donors wrote checks, not out of obligation or social pressure, but because they were genuinely moved by what they heard, genuinely inspired to be part of something larger than themselves. By the time the last guest left, Marcus was exhausted but elated. "We did it," he said to Olivia as they stood in the empty warehouse, surrounded by the detritus of the evening. Empty glasses, abandoned programs, echoes of conversations that would shape the Foundation's future. "You did it," Olivia corrected. "This was your vision." "Our vision," Marcus insisted. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "That's probably true. I'm very inspiring." Marcus pulled her into his arms, suddenly overwhelmed with gratitude and love, and the sheer improbability of everything that had led to this moment. "Marry me," he said. Olivia froze. "What?" "Marry me," Marcus repeated, realizing he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been together a few months. I know there are 1,000 reasons to wait. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building things that matter, making a difference together, being the kind of people who make the world slightly less awful." "Marcus, that's not a proposal. That's a manifesto." "Is that a no?" Olivia looked up at him, and there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. Ask me again when you actually have a ring and a plan and haven't just had a traumatic confrontation with your father." "But it's not a no?" "It's not a no," Olivia confirmed. "You're ridiculous and I love you, and we should probably talk about this when we're both less emotionally volatile. I can work with that." They stood there in the empty warehouse, holding each other, and Marcus thought about all the storms he'd weathered, literal and metaphorical, to get to this moment, about the bus stop and the rain, and the woman who had seen him when he'd been most lost, about courage and what it really meant. It meant standing in front of your father and refusing to apologize for choosing meaning over money. It meant loving someone despite the complications, despite the scrutiny, despite the 1,000 ways it would have been easier not to. It meant building something new on the foundation of something old, honoring a legacy while creating your own. Maya Rodriguez had been right that night in her essay. Courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being terrified and doing the thing anyway. Marcus was terrified of failure, of disappointing people, of not living up to his grandfather's legacy or Olivia's faith in him. But he was doing the thing anyway. And that, he was starting to understand, was enough. 1 year later, the rain came down in sheets, just like it had that first night, turning the streets into rivers and the sky into a solid mass of gray. Marcus stood at the window of the Whitmore Legacy Foundation's expanded offices. They needed more space as the work grew, as more schools and communities joined the network, and watched the storm with a sense of peace he'd never known before. "Still love watching the rain?" Olivia's voice came from behind him. He turned to find her standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee, her ring catching the light. They'd gotten engaged officially 3 months after the gala, married in a small ceremony surrounded by students and teachers and community members who had become their chosen family. Dr. Chen had cried during the vows. Richard Whitmore hadn't attended. "I love remembering what rain brought me," Marcus corrected, taking one of the coffee cups. "Best storm of my life." "Sap. You're sap now. You signed papers." Olivia laughed and came to stand beside him, looking out at the storm. "Maya's essay was published," she said. "The one about courage. It's going to be in an anthology of student writing." "That's amazing." "Is she excited?" "Terrified, actually. She said she didn't think anyone would care what a foster kid had to say about anything." "What did you tell her?" "That the people who need to hear her voice are exactly the ones who think foster kids don't have anything important to say. That her story matters. Her words matter. She matters." Marcus slipped his arm around Olivia's waist, pulling her close. In the years since they'd met, the foundation had expanded to serve 15 schools, had provided scholarships to 40 students, had funded classroom libraries and art programs and counseling services. It was enough. It would never be enough, not while kids like Maya still fell through cracks. But it was something. It was a start. Whitmore Development had stumbled without Marcus at the helm. The stock price volatile. Investors nervous. His father had been forced to bring in outside management to accept oversight he'd always resisted. Marcus should have felt vindicated. Mostly, he just felt sad for all the years they'd wasted fighting instead of building something together. But that was his father's journey to make or not make. Marcus had his own path now. "I'm pregnant," Olivia said suddenly, the words dropping into quiet like stones into still water. Marcus's brain took a moment to process. "You're what?" "Pregnant. About 8 weeks. I found out yesterday but wanted to wait to tell you until..." She looked up at him, anxious. "Is this okay? I know we talked about waiting, about getting the foundation more stable, but..." Marcus kissed her, cutting off the worried words, tasting coffee and rain, and the future they were building. When he pulled back, there were tears on his cheeks. "It's more than okay," he said. "It's perfect. It's..." He laughed, overwhelmed. "We're gonna have a baby." "We're gonna have a baby," Olivia confirmed. "And they're gonna grow up knowing that wealth is a tool, not a purpose. That success is measured in lives touched, not dollars earned. That courage means standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard," Marcus added. They stood at the window, watching the rain, thinking about the child they'd raised together, the world they'd helped shape for them, the legacy they'd passed down. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if it hadn't rained that night?" Olivia asked. "If you'd made it home before the storm hit?" "All the time," Marcus admitted. "But then I remember something Maya wrote in her essay, the line you quoted that first night." "Which line?" "That courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing the thing anyway." He kissed her forehead. "I was terrified that night. Lost. Unsure if I could actually walk away from everything I'd known, if I could become someone different. And then the rain came, and you were there, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore." "You were never alone," Olivia said softly. "You just couldn't see all the people who were willing to walk beside you once you chose a different path." Thunder rumbled overhead, and Marcus thought about his grandfather, about Thomas Whitmore, who had built houses for families who couldn't afford them, who had believed that business could be both profitable and purposeful. He wished his grandfather could see what Marcus had built, could meet Olivia, could know about the grandchild on the way. But maybe he could, somehow, maybe legacy wasn't just about what you left behind, but about the values that echoed forward through generations, changing and adapting, but remaining true to their core. "I love you," Marcus said, "for walking into that bus stop, for calling me out when I needed it, for believing I could be better than I was." "I love you too," Olivia replied, "for having the courage to actually change, for honoring your grandfather's legacy, for becoming a man who was always there, just buried under expectations and obligations." They stayed at the window as the storm raged outside, safe and warm and together, building dreams from rain and courage in the simple, revolutionary act of choosing meaning over money, purpose over profit, love over everything else. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, Marcus Whitmore, no longer the billionaire who had walked into a rain-soaked bus stop, but the man who had emerged from that storm transformed, held his wife and thought about their child and smiled. The storm that had changed everything had also given him everything, and he had never been more grateful for bad weather in his entire life. The end.